this is what we called Mediterranean. And it's basically more vegetables, more whole grains, more beans, more fruits, fatty fish, avocados, olive oil.
So, and I guess one of the things out of that then that if you that's in common is in all those cases you're saying not sort of the highly processed foods that are such a big
Yeah.
part of our diet. Even with all those variations, that sounds that's sort of one of the big thing that seems like it's in common and very different from what most of us are eating.
Yeah, and I think if we stepped back and took it at that level, the Greeks and the Turks and the French and the Moroccans would say, well, yeah, you're right. So the question was centered around the keto diet having this complete absence as much as possible of whole grains and fruits and beans. So 3 things similar and 3 things different. And so the way the question is framed, Jonathan, is if we take people with type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, and we ask them to go on these 2 diets for 12 weeks each in a crossover manner, so everybody gets to try both of them. We are assuming, since they both eliminate carbs in terms of added sugars and refined grains, that they will experience blood glucose benefits. But would there be an additional benefit by getting rid of the whole grains and the fruits and the beans? That would seem counter to health professionals' advice. So we were looking to see if there was an additional benefit.
So what happened? You've been teasing us, and now we want to know. I hear quite a lot of skepticism about the ketogenic diet, so I'm assuming that it was terrible. What were the results?
No, so people lost weight on both diets. We can get into some of the pros and cons, and there's some fun nuances to get into here. So the main outcome in terms of all of glucose, Jonathan, was glycosylated hemoglobin. I don't know how much your listeners will know what that term is. If you are a person with diabetes or prediabetes, you would know this is something to do with the red blood cells in your body are sort of a 90-day marker of how well you've been managing your glucose. So when you say glycosylated hemoglobin, the hemoglobin's from your red blood cell, and it means some glucose's molecules randomly stuck on the red blood cells, and it's kind of a good hint. Then we looked at, okay, so what about other things that happen? Let's look at blood pressure, let's look at blood lipids, let's look at liver enzymes, and pretty much across the board, everybody did better in everything on both diets. The things that stuck out as being statistically significant were 2. One is that for the keto group, their LDL cholesterol went up, while in the Mediterranean group, it went down, and that was statistically significant. So that was a point for Mediterranean. In both groups, their blood triglycerides went down, but they went down even more drastically in the keto diet. And so that was actually a point for keto.
And I think just to make sure we explain that for listeners, right? That's really surprising because that triglycerides is just like all the fats in your blood, aren't they, Christopher? So basically you're saying you ate nothing but fat, pretty much, is what you're saying. And yet the fats in your blood went down is rather remarkable, right?
It is. And that's a really funny part of metabolism. If you want me to go on a quick riff for that, the idea there is that if you're eating fat, it gets processed and stored as fat. If you're eating a whole lot of carb, the idea here is that you quickly absorb and use your carbohydrate for brain energy and muscles, immediate needs. The next thing you use it for is to replete these storage depots for glucose. So some is in your liver, some is in your skeletal muscle, and it's pretty easy to fill up your stores. And after that, you turn all your carbs into fats. And so this is a bizarre concept, Jonathan, but you got it right. When you eat a high carbohydrate, low fat diet, your blood triglycerides go up. But it's not because of the fat that you were eating. That was being metabolized and put away in a more controlled fashion than the excessive simple carbohydrates that you're eating. It's a very counterintuitive finding. You're correct.
And so the summary of your results, if I understand rightly, is that if you go on to this sort of healthy ketogenic diet, sort of the best one that you've designed here, actually the health results are really good. You say all these markers have improved. I've lost weight. This sounds like a win, Christopher.
So it's a wash. I would say it's a wash between the 2. They both worked for weight loss. You get a point for one and a point against for the other. But we looked beyond that. So a couple of the key issues here are adherence and being able to maintain the diet. And another factor, given that our study periods were only 12 weeks long, is what happens to other nutrient intake? What might happen over years and years of doing this? And what might happen to your microbiome? Because a ketogenic diet is pretty much by definition a lower fiber diet. And I actually won't have these results to share with the listeners today, but my colleagues Justin and Erica Sonnenberg right now have a freezer full of poop from our folks, and they are looking at what happened to the microbiome, and we're looking at a whole panel of inflammatory markers. So tell me if we're ready to look into the nutrient intake, and even more interesting actually to start with would be the adherence, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's talk about exactly that. So adherence is like science word for sort of like how sustainable this is, right? Like, is this something that I can keep doing? Like, adhere is when you tell me to do it, but for myself, it's like, can I stick with this for the long term? So, I mean, for me, that's always been the biggest concern about the ketogenic diet, as I think about, you know, friends and family members who've done this, that they've tried it for a bit, and then it becomes very hard to maintain because you go to your kid's birthday party and they're having a cake and there's a lot of societal pressure to eat a cake, and I think you just explained that's already blown my day. But you've now done this real study. Like, what have you seen in terms of sustainability?
Yeah. So, and let's talk about, there's an element to the design that I didn't explain for the 12 weeks, Jonathan. And that is, we decided that we wanted to kickstart everybody and get them to be as adherent or compliant, following the directions as much as they could, use whatever term you want. And for 4 of the 12 weeks on each phase, they had food delivered to them.
Which sounds great. I having said all of this, if you deliver the food to me, I'd eat almost anything. So,
and then by design, we left the last 8 weeks for them to prepare food on their own, so that we could see how well they were. What did it look like when they were very adherent, and what did they look like in real life? And we have one additional time point, Jonathan, which is after doing the crossover and doing both diets in random order. 12 weeks later, we went back and asked them what they were eating. Because my big question was, okay, you definitely mastered this thing. You had 12 weeks of help from a dietitian. You had group classes, you had individual meetings, you had more help than most people will ever get when they try this on their own. 12 weeks after the study, what did you do? So here's the fascinating thing, is that on average, we had made an adherence score from 0 to 10, and 10 was perfect and 0 was lousy. We kind of assumed that when we delivered the food, everybody would be at a 9 or a 10. Both groups on average, when we were feeding them food, got a 7.5 out of 10. So they didn't do a very good job, but they went from, a couple points before the study to 7.5 out of 10. So that kind of looked pretty good. Okay. Interestingly, more so on the keto diet than the Mediterranean diet, we had people scoring at the 2, 3, 4 level when we were delivering food. Some of them just outright rejecting the food that we delivered. Okay, now first of all, I'm irate, but on the other hand, thank you for being honest. Really? We enrolled you in a study and you didn't do what we told you to do? So does that undermine the finding, or is that an important part of the finding, that it was difficult to do? Fast forward now to when they do 8 weeks on their own. And when they did 8 weeks on their own, we again assessed